Welcome back to Mental Work. Today, I'm very happy to be sharing the microphone with Dr. Emma DeCicco. She's a clinical psychologist and a board-approved supervisor. She's also a clinical director and owner of the Dash Hub. Hey, Emma, how are you?
I'm good, thanks. I love the name Mental Work. That's awesome.
Yeah,
well done on that one.
Thank you. It took me ages to come up with it, and I'm glad that you like it. I hope people pick up on the wordplay that it's like, we are in like a mental line of work, and it does take a lot of mental work, but I don't know if it's obvious.
But it's excellent.
Thank you. Emma, I've got you on the podcast here today to just talk about kind of general barriers facing early career psychs. We're going to see where we go with this topic. There are a few things that you spoke to me about off air that we can bring in, which I'm really interested to ask you about. But firstly, I just want to have the listeners have a sense of who you are. Would you mind introducing yourself?
Of course. This is a bit I don't really like. I love to talk, but I don't really like to talk about myself, so I'll probably be quite quick. I think the things to know about me are that I've had a few different experiences in terms of pathways to where I've gotten to. So I actually started as a 4 and 2 and then got partway through that, decided I wanted to go back and do a master's, and then went on to do a doctorate as well after that before going into private practice, which is where I am now. So it's been an interesting journey. Professionally, and on the personal end of things, I've got 3 kids, so it's very busy, and I also love to run, so spend a lot of time running, sometimes with my clients as well, which is awesome.
Wow, that's really cool. It's like, even then I'm like, wow, how do you do that? Like, how do you run with clients? That's so cool. So I think we'll have lots to talk about. It sounds like you've had maybe like a non-traditional pathway, like throughout even your professional career to become a psychologist. Is that right?
Yeah, I think you could definitely say that. I really wanted to get right into practice as soon as I finished my undergraduate. So went and got offered a 4 and 2 pathway. This was pre-APRA, so it was a little bit different. Yes, I'm revealing my age now, but
I didn't expect you to say that. Yeah.
So yeah, I would say that it's been less than traditional, but definitely really fruitful. And it's given me a lot of amazing experiences to understand where my supervisees and, staff are coming from in their experiences as well.
Yeah. So maybe we can start off, like, if you share maybe a little bit about what you're kind of seeing as the current landscape facing early career psychs, just from like your observations and I guess your professional experience being a clinic owner as well as being a supervisor.
Yeah, it's a really interesting one, I think. We've never really seen a time quite like the one at the moment. And I know a lot of our very early career psychs and therapists coming through in the last, perhaps they graduated 2019, 2020. They're coming into a landscape where clients are just abundant and there is just no end to work. And so that, I think, presents lots of different challenges, and there's probably a few benefits in there as well, because psychs are so in demand at the moment. It's really difficult to be able to get the psychologists that you want and the therapists you want to work with, but at the same time, I think it's definitely challenging, I think, for an early career psych to go into a space where they are probably bombarded with clients from the very beginning.
Yeah. You must remember a time then when it wasn't like this, if it's such a dramatic change. So like, were we not always in demand? Were we not always bombarded by clients?
No, it really wasn't. So pre-Medicare, before Better Access came in and people were able to get, rebates for psychology services, it really was it was very expensive. It was very cost prohibitive to get into a psychologist. And there really wasn't as much demand for our services, depending on the specialty. So when I started, I actually started in an EAP, which is a little bit different again. And the way that the demand for services was really quite different to what it is today. And when I first started in private practice, we had to work really hard to get the referrals and the clients through and establish those relationships. And then I actually started my own private practice January 2020. So you can only imagine that what it was like to start at the beginning of COVID. And it was just unbelievable, the sheer volume of clients coming through at that point and trying to place them without overloading our psychs. It was really important not to do that. So
yeah, because perhaps like the temptation is to be like, wow, we've got so many clients, like we could expand rapidly, or like, you know, we could do like 3 clinics or something. So it sounds like there was a conscious decision to be like, well, actually, no, we need to think of the health of our practitioners as well.
Yeah, I think it's really important because when I first started out in EAP and I was a very brand new early career psych, I burnt out really quickly, and it was a really difficult, exhausting experience, and part of the reason why I went back to do my master's and then doctorate. And so coming out of those experiences, I really went into creating my business very much from the perspective of wanting to protect clinicians, because, you know, if our clinicians are well, then they're able to look after their clients and all of those kinds of ideas. And I actually, you know, I'm a co-director. So the other owner of the business has come from corporate and finance background, which is just huge demand, huge stress, all of that sort of thing. So she's come into it with the same ethos around how do we create something that's truly sustainable for every single person in it. What does that model have to look like? And that's been a real challenge in some ways, but so rewarding in what we've been able to implement and how we've been able to do it.
Okay. Yeah, because like, I mean, just to point out as well, it's like, and I get really annoyed with this perspective, but some people are like, why are you getting so burnt out? You're just talking to people, right? And I guess this would be like the public perception, but like you and I would know that it's an incredibly emotionally and like cognitively demanding task that involves like a variety of things, not only talking, right?
That's, yeah, exactly. And it depends what you're doing as well. I started out, I was doing very, very high risk like critical incidents and lots of, you know, that really pointy-ended work. And so seeing that day in and day out, that was obviously really taxing. And I think in general, what we do, it is such emotion-based work, and it's so intense. And so if we're holding not only ourselves, but our clients in mind and creating a safe space and formulating and doing all these different processes at the exact same time, it is really, really difficult. And I think it's really easy to burn out.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, like I've done an episode before where I've talked about burnout, and yeah, I burned out myself like the end of last year, and it's very unpleasant. And like, I guess like most people listening, like given just it's so common and just the state of the world and stuff, it's just like, it's very easy to burn out, particularly at this time.
Yeah, even as you're talking, I'm thinking about the factors that relate to burnout, and it really does come down to, I think, a combination of different things. I mean, a lot of us are drawn into this field because of our own experiences and our own stuff. So there's going to be quite a number of us as a population who, have things in our background that might make us more vulnerable. And I think that's actually a really good thing, because not that we're more vulnerable, but that we have had experiences and we want to go into a helping profession holding that stuff. But we also need to honour that and make sure that we've got buffer room as well. And so I guess it comes down to really knowing yourself, knowing your stuff, knowing your triggers, knowing your needs. And that's a really interesting thing. But the way that we've done it, because I really enjoy schema therapy.
And
I use a lot of schema therapy. Yeah, it's awesome. I use a lot of schema therapy with my clients. And so in designing the model that we use at work, I actually mapped the workplace against the core emotional needs.
Oh,
so
cool.
kind of went, well, we've all got the same core emotional needs. We all just have different levels of them essentially. And that can map perfectly against a workplace. So why don't we do that?
Can you tell us a bit more about that? Like, I'd be interested in unpacking that. I'm currently doing the schema accreditation myself. And so like, I'm interested, and like lots of people are interested in schema. So I'd love to know like what you see as like the core emotional needs and like how you've mapped that out.
Yeah, absolutely. I could talk forever about that. So I think, if we look at it and we look at that the research tells us that if we're getting these core emotional needs met the majority of the time, then, we tend to stay quite well. And if we're looking at workplace wellness, why don't we apply the same concept there? So I kind of unpacked. So I talk about 6 core emotional needs. The first being safety. So we need safety in our workplace, and that's not just physical safety, but it's psychological safety as well. And so that's making sure that all the different processes are in place to make sure that we are all safe where we work and that we feel safe. We walk into a space that feels safe for us, which is so important. But that's pretty basic. I think every workplace has that, that's basic health safety. So I then went to, okay, what are the other needs? So we've got secure attachment. We really do need that. So how can we implement that in a workplace? And so that for me is looking at really stable and predictable figures in your workplace that you can rely on. And yes, I'm talking about like a group private practice here, but I think it applies for individual clinicians or like community-based public health, whatever that is, because really then you're looking at stable and predictable supervisors, managers, and that sense of inclusion that you belong, which is so fundamental to us. So having that within the workplace, I think, is a really good foundation. And then we move to, having the freedom to express valid needs. And that might mean, being able to express the things that you need. So for instance, we're very neurodivergent as a workplace. And so having appropriate modifications and accommodations in place to meet the clinician's needs as well as the client needs. And also having the opportunity for every person to have a say so that they can express. So we have quarterly meetings where we do what's called a dotmocracy, and we all, put up things we want to, start, stop and keep, and vote on what can be implemented and what needs to change, and everyone gets a say in that, which I think is that's really important, that people get to express that very safely. And, when we move on to the next core emotional need, autonomy, that's pretty straightforward. You need a sense of control over the clients you see, a sense of control over your schedule, flexibility, things like that. For some people, it's more important than others. I know for me, being a mum, I really need that flexibility. It's really important. So that's, really fostering that autonomy and people having a say over what their work day looks like is hugely important, because, you might be someone who can work till, 11 o'clock at night, and I'm not. I need to start 9 o'clock in the morning and be done by, 6 o'clock in the evening. Otherwise my brain will just completely melt down.
Absolutely. And I mean, just to kind of stop on that, it's like, literally, like when I was working as a provisional psych, one of my key grievances was that our admin person kept on changing my schedule around. And so it would muck up my schedule. It would make me like work too much or make me work too little. And it was literally like so stressful. Like I could not believe how much this seemingly minor thing was actually affecting me mentally. So it's like, when we're talking about these core emotional needs, like I think it's important to communicate that they can't be understated how important they are.
Yeah, it is essential to your well-being. If you feel that you don't have autonomy, and particularly if autonomy is very important to you as well, then, and it is for certain people like you and me, so, that's going to have a profound impact on your well-being. And so just knowing this about people and getting them to unpack it before they start, so that we know, okay, autonomy is the most important thing to you. What needs to be in place? And I'm saying I do this with all of my colleagues, my supervisees, both within and outside of the practice, because it's really important to know what we need and how we can get that met appropriately. And I think a really important part of that is one of the key factors in burnout is not being able to work within your niche. So perhaps it's working too broadly, taking on clients that you really don't enjoy working with, or working in areas that aren't within your, interest. And that's pretty much a recipe for burnout as well. So I think part of autonomy is, being able to say, these are the clients that I really enjoy working with. This is what I want to build on.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, like with working too generally or with clients you don't enjoy, it makes the work unsatisfying. We all have a need, I guess, for mastery and to feel satisfied with our work. And so it really touches on that as well. I think with this model that you're presenting, like meeting employees' core emotional needs, I feel like it's quite revolutionary. Like, there's one side that's like, with HR, it would be like, well, let's just give them a pizza party every quarter, and then that'll be enough to take care of them. Like, I kind of haven't heard this approach before. It's really amazing that you want to take such good care of your psychologists. Like, have you found that it's been working?
Yes, I want to say yes. And the feedback is yes. It is different, and I think it's very much appreciated by the people that I work with, and I think it's sprung from not just that old HR line of keep them happy and then they'll do their job. It's sprung from a deep desire within me to surround myself with a team who I really trust and I really gel with, and together removing that really of isolation. And to be able to do that, you've got to build in those needs and really, really value that and really want to work to meet those. And I think being able to present it like that as we're going through, it helps people to unpack what it is that they're asking for and why it's so important as well. And it gives you that joint language when you're going into conversations to be able to understand, what perhaps the different perspectives are. As well. And I mean, you hit it on the nail on the head with that sense of mastery. That's so important to preventing burnout. And that comes under the autonomy and competence.
Yes.
Need as well. And in addition to that, it's a sense of identity. And it's so important. I spend the majority of supervisions, particularly at the beginning with early career psychs, helping them to understand that, what we've got is in the room, this is a safe space for you to be able to, let down the guards and just start to explore who you are as a psychologist. Like, my job is not to educate you. My job is not to be the teacher and you are the student. It is to be equal and almost holding that mirror to, let's unpack what kind of psychologist you are. And there's no expectations around that. It's a journey of discovery.
That's really cool, because I do think professional identity is really important. And I mean, it's anecdotal evidence that like a lot of early career psychs are like, what the hell am I doing in this profession? Why should I stay? Should I leave? Maybe I can earn more money just working like at Kmart full time, and then I get all the reduced stress. So I feel like meeting our core emotional needs as well as finding out our professional identity could be key to longevity in the profession as well as satisfaction. And I just wonder like whether maybe having your team in the long term was a motivating factor for you. Like all of this like would hopefully prevent burnout and encourage longevity, right?
Yeah, I think sustainability is what is so important. I realized for me very early on that because when I finished my master's and doctorate and, all of that sort of stuff, and then I was having babies in between. And I realized after my last baby, I had this like sense of panic when I went back to work, and I just couldn't figure it out. I was just like, what is going on? Why am I so panicked? Why am I so anxious? Eventually it dawned on me that I had no end date now, because I wasn't studying. I wasn't going to have any more babies. So I wasn't going to have any mat leave. There was no end date. Like, I was going to have to work forever. And it really overwhelmed me. And I was like, oh my goodness, I didn't realize how unsustainable I feel my work is, that I'm just so looking forward to every year or so having, a year off essentially. And that really got me thinking, well, should I be a psychologist? Maybe this is not what I'm meant to do. But then I realized it was probably, a sustainability issue rather than, a poor fit, if that makes sense. So I really focused on figuring out how to make this sustainable.
How did you know it was a sustainability thing rather than being a poor fit? Like, how do you know that you actually want to be a psychologist?
I have a massive HEX debt that tells me that I need to be a psychologist. No. I think it's because I do love what I do.
Yeah.
And I do, not all the time. There are certainly days. But I do love what I do. And I do love being with my clients. And I feel that I'm relatively good at it. I wouldn't say good. I'm relatively okay at it. And I do enjoy it. And so it felt to me that it was just not sustainable. It wasn't like I desperately wanted to go and do anything else.
Yeah. So how can like early career psychs know, like, is it just that I'm not being resilient enough, or is the job not sustainable, or do I even like to be a psychologist? Like, I know that's a big question, but maybe we could focus on like maybe the first two. Like, if I'm feeling burnt out, is it because I'm not resilient, or is it because of the workplace?
Could be a little bit of column A, could be a little bit of column
True.
B. Who knows? There is a way to unpack that though. And I do spend a lot of time working with early career psychs as well as colleagues who are feeling burnt out and having a look at what's actually going on. What are your days looking like, and what chews up the most spoons for you? I'm sure you're across spoon theory. So we talk about spoons. What's taking out the spoons, and what is it in terms of the core needs that is not getting met, and how do we introduce that? And I know for me, it came down to, I am not the kind of psychologist who can see 6 or 7 clients a day, 5 days a week. It is not me. I just can't. Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. So I was like, oh, what do I do? So I realized I wanted to keep being a therapist, but to limit the amount of time I was doing that. I wanted diversity. So I wanted to do other things. So I started doing assessments, which I really enjoy. It gives me the flexibility. And I started doing, various supervising, building out the business, doing workshops and presentations, and just really stepping into different areas and really changing it up, which helped to keep things quite vibrant and alive. And, I didn't feel as burnt out. The other thing is, I realized that, we go through uni and it's really stressful, and, you've got a million different things to do and it feels like it's never going to end. But it does end, and when you're doing that, you do get this sense of achievement when you've submitted that assignment and you've finished that exam and you've done this, and there is kind of an end date to things. And I realized that with the kind of therapy that I do, it's more long-term, complex, that I wasn't getting that sense of achievement, like, oh, I've done something, if that makes sense.
Yeah,
and that's not related to the relationship with the client. It's more, the project is finished and I can, step into the next thing. So I realized I needed to integrate that into my world as well. I need that sense of completion, mastery, achievement, and next type deal.
That makes perfect sense to me. It's like when I was doing my PhD, I quickly realized that compared to undergrad or honours, I wasn't going to get many ticks on my work. So it would come back usually with scribbles, cross this out, rewrite this, rewrite your whole chapter sort of thing. And so I totally relate to that, because it's like, I'm not getting like these little, ticks of encouragement or dopamine hits sort of thing.
Yeah, little dopa hits. Absolutely. And our clients don't come to us because they're feeling really well. They typically come to us with what's not working. And so you can spend your days feeling like you're not doing anything. And that's particularly early career. It's really hard to hold that. Really, really hard.
It's like in my intervention, like thing for my notes, I'd be like, held hope, ? Like, that's my intervention for the session.
Yep, holding their hope.
Yeah. So yeah, I totally get that. I do wonder what your perspective on is with the like resilience of early career psychs. Do you think it's changed over time?
Really hard to say. I know there's been discussions and a bit of a trend toward early career psychs getting into the field and burning out very, very quickly. I don't know if that's more than it used to be in terms of, the amounts of burnout. I would suspect that previously it was a real just keep on pushing through type thing, which I don't good idea. I definitely don't recommend just push on through. I do think that early career psychs are under more pressure in a lot of ways because they are walking into quite comparatively high-paying jobs and expected to kind of launch into your 6 clients a day in order to be able to sustain the figures that they're, earning. And that to me is probably problematic for some people. I think also when we're talking about core emotional needs and the generations that are coming through, there is, I think, a bit of a trend that interpersonal experiences are very, very different for the generation coming through now. They've grown up with phones and tech. I mean, I didn't get a phone until I was over 18 because they weren't in existence. And so being launched from that world into seeing people in person and dealing with the anxiety that comes with interpersonal interactions day in, day out, that's a huge leap to make. And I think there's a little bit of that might come into it for some people as well.
Like I'm a millennial myself. So like the generation coming up, I reckon maybe younger psychs in their 20s, early 20s. I think they're the generation below. But yeah, they like grew up with tech quite early. And I think that's a really interesting observation that it's like there might be kind of a generalized anxiety about social interactions that might be coming into the way that new therapists are interacting with their clients as well. So it might be a heightened anxiety there.
Definitely think there is a heightened anxiety. I think that's been pretty obvious, I suppose, in my observations across the board, that there does seem to be that heightened anxiety, and there's good reason for it as well.
One of the observations that has come up previously when people are talking about early career psychs is that maybe earlier, like let's say 10 years ago, there was more of an emphasis on like your own personal stuff and exploring that and working out transference and countertransference and I guess addressing difficulties that you might have and triggers. And I just wondered whether that's an observation that you might have had as well, or maybe it's been different.
So that's something I really focus on as a supervisor because it is incredibly important. And so one of the first things that I ask my supervisees to do is actually to go away and do a schema formulation on themselves. And in, obviously whatever they're willing to bring in that is not therapy. But there is that certain overlap between therapy and supervision. And I really believe that it's incredibly important that we know ourselves and we know as a supervisor, we know our supervisees so that we can help them to unpack and help them to hold the stuff that's triggered for them in a non-shaming way. That acknowledgement that we are going to have our own stuff and that is okay. And we can learn how to hold our stuff and show up as the therapist we are as well.
Yeah. So I mean, like overall, there's kind of this real acknowledgement, which might not have been in the past. I'm not sure. Maybe you can speak to this, but there seems to be this real acknowledgement nowadays that we're not just blank slate therapists. It's like there's a human there, we have needs and we need to meet those. And if we do that, then hopefully we can have sustainability and happier clinicians in the future.
Yeah. And I think that's really important. If we continue down our core emotional needs trail, we, obviously spontaneity and plays in there, and that's incredibly important. We need that. That's lots of fun team events and all that sort of stuff, having that really light vibe. But one of I think the core emotional need that most often gets overlooked are the limits and self-discipline and having those realistic limits in place.
For ourselves?
For ourselves. And as well, that might be within a workplace having realistic limits around, the way you do your notes and making sure that you're maintaining compliance and all of that sort of stuff. But it's also in that cup, I talk about like self-reflection and constructive self-criticism and being able to hold that as well. And that I think is really hard to do as an early career psych. We tend to be so sensitive to perceived criticism or having done it wrong or whatever that looks like, that's a really tricky one.
It's so true. I should do an episode on that because I think it's really true. Like it's something that I got trained out of during my PhD. If I was that sensitive, I wouldn't have made it through because it was literally like rewrite this chapter 6 times, you're working on the same chapter for a year and a half sort of thing. So I quickly adjusted to that. But boy, in the start, it was super painful. And it's very similar to being a therapist. It's like you want to do the best thing. And it feels like so embarrassing and shameful when you get something wrong. So absolutely, it's such an important thing for early career psychs to learn how to handle, I guess, constructive feedback well.
Yeah, it is. It is really hard. And you're right. I was the same. I distinctly remember my supervisor writing the note on my thesis after the millionth time I'd rewritten it, saying, "You are teaching your examiners to suck eggs." And
God.
Thanks. So it was a bit of, okay, I'm just going to compartmentalize and shut down that emotion, that response there.
Check that in the imaginary lockbox of the brain.
Yeah, that's it. But I think if we really think about it, if we're raising a child and we are meeting safety, secure attachment, freedom to express, valid needs, autonomy, spontaneity and play, but we're missing healthy limits, realistic limits, and self-discipline, we're doing them a disservice. They're going to grow up with some pretty significant issues, right? And I think it's the same as a psychologist in nurturing ourselves and being nurtured by our supervisors in our workplace. We need to make sure that need for realistic limits and self-control and self-discipline is actually met. And I do focus on it in a specific way, which is quite easy to do, to figure out what kind of coping mode we slip into when that inner critic fires up. And that tells us a lot about what the mechanism is that probably undermines our resilience.
Yeah, that's so interesting. I'm just aware of the time, Emma. So I think this might be a good bookend to our conversation. I feel like we could talk forever. I'd be so interested in discussing further that idea of what contributes to resilience, but also how we can get better at the self-discipline and setting realistic limits for ourselves. But I just wondered whether you wanted to end on something if you had an overall nugget of wisdom for early career psychs to take away from this conversation or in general, what would it be?
I've probably got a few, but one of them would be book your leave in advance.
Love it. Thank you. It's so practical. Love it. Yeah.
And book lots of it, minimum 6 weeks if you can per year.
Thank you. I think that's so important. I did the same thing for myself this year after the burnout thing last year, and it has worked so well. Do you do the same thing?
Yes. And I sit down with all my clinicians at the beginning. I'm like, right, we're booking your 6 weeks of leave. So when are we going to, do you need it all at once or do you prefer a week here and there?
Yeah.
What does that need to look like? Plan it in advance.
Brilliant. That is amazing. So Emma, if listeners want to find out more about you or your practice, where can they find you?
So we have a website, www.the-hub.com.au, and we're on Facebook and Instagram, although I'm terrible at Instagram, so I apologise in advance.
Just don't look at the Instagram.
Maybe not.
Yeah. And could you be contacted for, say, supervision, or are you booked out for now?
Yeah, so I'm always happy to touch base with anyone around supervision. We have a senior team as well who also provide supervision and are really lovely, and we work together on that. So we definitely have space there.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Emma, for joining us. I'm really pleased to have had you and learn about, I guess, you're just really unique approach to assisting early career psychs. I wish all our workplaces were like this. It's as you're talking, I'm ticking off the needs that were unmet in previous workplaces, and it sounds like you've onto something. So thank you.
Thanks so much for having me. I really, really enjoyed having a chat with you.